Well, hello, I'm Karen Stallman, and I am an Ag Resource Specialist with the SIU School of Medicine at the beautiful SIU Carbondale campus and Center for Rural Health and Social Service Development. But today I am at home, and at home is on our family farm in Randolph County. And here in Southern Illinois, we're just now wrapping up harvest. And this year's harvest, or this year's season overall, has kind of been a stressful one. They all are stressful, but this has been a little unusual. Here where we live, which is about halfway between St. Louis and Carbondale, we're in one of those areas of the state that we weren't under the right cloud. So all summer we did not receive much rain. This past weekend we got an inch of rain, and that is the first measurable rain we've had since August 21st. And all summer, we did not get much. Not sure what we were doing, but we weren't doing the right thing because we sure didn't get rain. So we've been through harvest, like I said, wrapping up, and we've had some equipment breakdowns. An auger broke earlier this week. Uh, the weather, the drought, and as a result, the Mississippi River is low, and that's affected some prices because we've not been able to move grain like we usually do. So there are some things that make us struggling farmers, and we're not alone. And we also always have that kind of cloud hanging over our head of farm succession, because that's always in the back of our minds. Who's going to take over the farm when we're no longer able to farm or no longer here? So lots of things can cause farmers to struggle. So we're really glad that you're a part of the webinar today. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Wyszynski to introduce himself. And Dr. Wyszynski, we look forward to the information that you have to share with us, and then I'll be joining back a little bit later on.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen. I appreciate that. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Fielding Resilience, Identifying and Supporting Struggling Farmers. On behalf of the SIU School of Medicine Center for Rural Health and Social Service Development and the Farm Family Resource Initiative, I want to thank you. I want to thank you both for your interest in these topics and for the work you do with and for our farmers and farm family members. Being a producer is not easy, as you heard Karen say there in the opening. And the services you provide are absolutely critical. Many of you are on the front lines. You're in the trenches, and you've got the scars and the stories to prove it. So again, thank you. Like Karen said, my name is Dr. Nick Wyszynski. I'm on faculty at the SIU School of Medicine, and I oversee our first-year medical students curriculum. I'm also trained as a therapist. I'm not a farmer. I can't speak to the day in and day out experiences our farmers and farm family members face firsthand, but I've learned a heck of a lot working with the Farm Family Resource Initiative. And today I'm hoping we can learn a bit from each other. So this webinar focuses primarily on how to recognize the signs that someone might be struggling in some way. This is a very light touch on topics that run pretty deep. You're not going to finish today and be a therapist, but you will finish today, hopefully, with an appreciation for the range of ways that people might react to the difficult things in their lives. Our lives are complicated, they're messy, and given the nature of your work, you might be among the first people to notice that something isn't quite right with a producer or one of their family members. That's an amazing, sobering honor. My hope today is to equip you with information to sharpen your noticing skills and to prepare you to offer some in-the-moment support. So in this webinar, your microphones are automatically muted. So if you have comments as we go along, absolutely feel free to either drop them in the chat box. I'll try to check that between each slide, or press the raise your hand button and we'll unmute you. I'd love to hear what you're thinking. Lastly, our runtime for this webinar is about an hour. The exact time will depend on the amount of questions and discussions we have throughout. Okay, so I have a few goals in mind for today's conversation. First, I really want to pull back the curtain. There's a lot of mystery about mental health and mental illness and reactions to stress. As best as I can, I want to take the mystery out of that. The conditions we're going to discuss today are not bizarre. In some respects, they're actually pretty normal. In fact, I'm going to argue that to be human is to experience all of these things: sadness, anxiety, hopelessness to some degree or another. Distress is a pretty common thing. And thankfully, getting help for being distressed is actually becoming more and more common. I do want to issue a disclaimer though. Although I'll be talking through some diagnostic criteria for things like depression and anxiety, I don't think it's our job to go around diagnosing people. Good diagnosis is a complex, multifaceted, time-consuming process. And really, I don't think it's important that we have a label for people. What is important is that we just notice when things seem off and then intervene in some way. Second, I'd like to emphasize application in our conversation today. So, how do we determine if we're witnessing someone struggle? And then, how do we intervene with someone who might be experiencing some kind of psychological distress? I hope after today that you come away with a few more tools in your toolbox. I hope things feel less scary, maybe more understandable. I hope you feel more comfortable to engage people who are hurting. And in short, and I know that this might sound kind of hokey, but I hope that you feel empowered to make a difference where you're at. You're in positions where you could alter the course of someone's life for a long time, and that's huge. Finally, again, I'd like our time today to be conversational. I absolutely welcome a dialogue. There are moments for discussion that are built into this webinar, but please, if you have a question or thought, you want to contribute in some way, don't hesitate to jump in either through the chat or by pressing the raise your hand button. If you select the raise hand button, we'll unmute you so that you can speak. Okay, so a little context. Back in 2020, researchers published a pilot study looking at depression, anxiety, and stress in 170 young farmers and ranchers in the Midwest. The average age of their participants was about 30 years old. And get this, they found that 71% met criteria for generalized anxiety disorder and 53% met criteria for a major depressive disorder. Those are pretty massive numbers. Our producers are feeling the squeeze. Much like Karen discussed at the beginning, there's a lot going on in the farming community. People are feeling the squeeze. And I want to check in with all of you right now with an anonymous poll. In a second, I'm going to display a slide with a QR code. You can scan that QR code with your phone. If you don't have your phone handy, or maybe you're joining the webinar with your phone, I also have a link and an ID number that you can enter into a web browser. And once you scan the code or go to the website, you'll get to submit your thoughts about the following question. Again, all of these responses will display anonymously. So I just want to check in. What have you seen contribute to producers' depression, anxiety, and stress? And again, you can either scan that QR code or go to slido.com and enter that number, and you can participate right there. So let's take a minute and just see what kinds of responses we get. Financial stressors, absolutely. I've been reading about the impact of inflation on our farmers and how that's taking a giant toll. Economic instability, family struggles, absolutely. Weather conditions. Karen was talking about that today. Not much rain in Southern Illinois this season. Financial debt, seeing kind of this financial thread running through. Finances can make people feel pretty desperate. Marriage problems, that's a significant thing. Marriage difficulties just in general, but also when you're running an operation like a farm, lots of things to talk about. Weather, cost, stress to keep the family farm. Absolutely. The future of the farm, sure. Sickness. You know, our producers are an aging population. I think I saw that the average age right now for producers is around like 54, 55, 56. Thinking about what to do with the farm beyond. that your life, that's a major source of stress. Lack of employees, yes. I think just about anywhere in the economy is feeling that right now. Family conflicts, substance abuse, absolutely significant. Parenting, lack of hired help, yes. Death of a family member, absolutely. Certifications and compliance paperwork. Isn't that the thing? I'm just interested in that answer. It seems to me that life has become more bureaucratic in general, and it's interesting to hear that in the farming world, that's a stressor as well. Thank you for sharing that. As you see there, it seems like family matters and weather are some of our top most frequently cited things. Also, I'd say the economic stuff too kind of comes into play there. So thank you so much for, it looks like we got one more person typing here. I really appreciate those of you. Input costs. Absolutely. Thank you for taking the time to share what people are interest rates. Absolutely. You know, I I I read this list and it gives me um, I don't know, it gives me respect for our farm families and what they're dealing with and the important work that they provide our country. Uh, and often probably does not get the respect that it deserves and goes unnoticed a lot of the time. And all that you deal with in order to make what you do possible and what they do possible to provide for a country, that's huge. Gives me a lot of respect for what you do and a lot of empathy. Thank you so much for participating in that. I want to add some more context to this, and we're going to revisit some of those ideas that you just dropped in that poll. So this is sometimes those stressors get to be too much for our producers because that's a lot. This is a photo of a story that ran in the USA Today back in 2020, so that's 3 years ago now, and it's about the uptick in producer suicides. It's an incredibly sobering headline, and I'd like to be able to tell you that 3 years later that the headlines have changed. Unfortunately, they haven't. This is a story by 12 News in Kansas from August 2023. Producers are still feeling the squeeze, much like you just noted in that poll. Stress and anxiety come from a lot of things: poor weather conditions, input costs, fluctuations in the prices of goods, inflation, global trade negotiations, succession planning, who's going to take this operation over, the grueling taxing labor that's required of farm work, uh, family issues, the lack of hired help, all of those things make farming difficult. In this article, they quote a farmer who says the following, quote, when you're in a situation looking at drought, prices of all kinds, having to liquidate a herd because you don't have enough hay or grass or the ponds are dry, all these things weigh on you, unquote. And I would go as far as to say farming, being a producer is not just a career that you don't just like leave that at your 9 to 5 job and go home and then it's a separate world. It's a lifestyle. It's a way of being in the world. And so all of these things weigh on you during the day, during the night, going to bed, all of that. So these are major stressors. And though the ag community is big, the work can be pretty isolating. And this puts our producers and our farm families in impossible situations, and it takes a toll on their mental health. Sometimes they see no other solution than to die. Indeed, according to the National Rural Health Association, the suicide rate among farmers could be up to 3.5 times higher than the general population. That's that's pretty significant, and it shouldn't be that way. I think this is important context, and I think it's important context for a reason. It is normal to face the kinds of stressors that farmers and farm family members are facing and to feel depressed, anxious, and hopeless because of them. It's a big idea, so I want to say that again. It's normal to face these kinds of stressors and feel depressed, anxious, and hopeless because of them. If someone didn't feel sad, anxious, and hopeless in response to some of those things, I'd want to check their pulse to see if they were alive. So, what's my point here? My point is this: our depressed, anxious, hopeless producers and their family members are not aberrations. They're not bizarre or unusual or weak or defective or just can't cut it. They are flesh and blood, and of course they're depressed. Of course they're anxious. Of course they feel hopeless. But maybe, hopefully, with the right tools, perhaps they don't have to feel those things as much anymore. So, I want to talk about the signs someone might show if they're experiencing depression. Before we dig in, again, I have two notes about my approach for this portion of our talk. First, I'm going to show you a lot of information quickly. I'm going to display each slide in this section in its entirety. And I'm doing that because each of these indicators overlaps quite a bit. And also so you can take some notes if you want to do that. And second, I want to let you know that these are just indicators. Though many of them are taken from formal diagnostic criteria for a major depressive episode, they're not meant to be used for true diagnosis. Rather, they're just meant to give us a taste, a little flavor of how depression could look for people. So, people experiencing depression might present in a number of ways. They might have a constant, persistent sadness. They might lose pleasure in things they once enjoyed. They might have fluctuations in their weight without trying. That could be gaining weight or losing weight. They may not have much of an appetite, or they might have too much of an appetite. Or they might have trouble sleeping or feel like they can't get enough sleep. They may feel lethargic with no energy, easily exhausted, even from routine things they've always done. They might feel guilty. They may not be able to focus like they once did, or they might be paralyzed trying to make decisions. They might be thinking about death as a way to find relief. And I'm going to argue that all people have experienced one or more of these things at some point in their lives. It's important to remember, though, that just feeling sad doesn't mean you're depressed. It makes you human. Instead, these symptoms building on one another, persisting for a period of time, it starts to raise the question that there may be a problem. Things really start to get out of hand when these symptoms accumulate and persist, and when they themselves become the cause of distress, and when they interfere with daily functioning. And I would just add this little note here too. Any of these things, when there is significant deviation from the norm, what you're accustomed to people experiencing and doing and behaving, that then starts to raise your alert a little bit. So let's put flesh on these ideas. What might be clues that alert you to possible depression? Well, it could be a producer who used to enjoy woodworking in the shop, maybe grabbing coffee with friends in the early morning hours, but now hasn't worked in the shop for a month and says they don't want to meet up with their friends for coffee anymore. That's kind of withdrawing, isolating themselves. Loss of pleasure or interest in something they once enjoyed. It might be someone who's been sad, has trouble sleeping, doesn't feel like they have much energy anymore. I've heard people say, I used to could work circles around myself, today. The old me could have worked circles around myself today, that kind of mentality. And so maybe they take that lack of energy, the trouble sleeping, the sadness, they go to their doctor because they think maybe something's physically wrong with them. And maybe it's actually just the emotional or psychological that's beginning to take a toll on the physical. It could be a spouse that says they've noticed a change, that maybe their husband or wife isn't the same person anymore. It could be any number of things. My recommendation is this: trust your gut. If something feels off, then it might actually be off. We'll talk more in a second about what to do if your gut tells you someone might be in danger of hurting themselves. So I'm going to put a pin in that idea for a second, but we'll come back to it. I think it's important to talk about how depression might manifest in men specifically. Um, there are more and more women who are farming, but our modal farmer is still a man. In the latest stats I saw, about mid 50s. And sometimes the signs that depression might be affecting men are a little bit different, and there could be a reason for that. So men in most Western cultures, including the United States, aren't really socialized to talk about or express their emotions. We've all heard the saying, boys don't cry, right? In fact, the only emotion that society sanctions for men is anger. Men are allowed to be angry, but they're really not allowed to be sad. It can come across as weakness. And so this can result in a couple of things. Sometimes This lack of emotional literacy means men might not know what they feel, and sometimes this means all feelings come out as irritability or anger. So if you have a male farmer who seems angry or aggressive or irritable, it might not be exactly what it seems. It could be a sign of something more happening below the surface, maybe even some sadness just leaking out in a different kind of way. We're going to pivot now to talk about anxiety. Anxiety can exist separate from depression or right alongside it. You can battle both simultaneously. And there are also a lot of ways that anxiety can manifest in a person. I don't think it's important that we discuss each way that anxiety can manifest. So instead, what I'm going to do is focus on some common everyday kinds of symptoms that anxiety can produce. So I'm going to talk about two basic indicators of anxiety. Uh, the best synonym for anxiety is worry or nervousness. And again, all people feel worry from time to time. That's totally normal. But there are times when worry takes over, when it impairs our ability to function. When worry becomes excessive, you should take note. And you might be hearing me say that and wondering, okay, well, how do I know if the worry is excessive? Often excessive worry becomes rumination. And rumination is a 10-cent word that basically means you keep replaying the same fear over and over and over again in your mind. It actually comes from animals, which many of you probably know this. Rumination is in animals is like regurgitating food that you've already eaten so that you can chew it again. Just chew the cud. And that's basically what's happening psychologically with anxiety. It tells you everything you need to know. You get stuck in this worry trap that you can't get out of. It's all you think about, it's all you talk about, it's all you search on the internet. Your behavior changes to accommodate the worry. You might even seek constant reassurance from others that specific things you're worried about are going to work out. Rumination is a vicious, persistent, nasty thing. It steals people's joy, often leaves them feeling hopeless. And rumination is not too hard to spot. People who ruminate have trouble hiding it unless they completely isolate themselves altogether, which again, that's an indicator that something might be wrong. So either of those things, pretty easy to pick up on, both indicative of something that could be going on a little bit more below the surface. People might also experience physical manifestations of anxiety. We're probably all pretty familiar with the idea of a panic attack, which is when a person's anxiety looks and feels very similar to a medical condition. People who have panic symptoms have trouble breathing, or they get a heavy feeling on their chest, or they start sweating, or they get the shakes. If people experience these symptoms, I think they should absolutely be encouraged to consult with a physician just to rule out any underlying physical conditions. And if there's no physiological explanation, it's likely anxiety. So, what do you do if someone presents with excessive worry? I think you can do a few things. Ask open-ended questions, help normalize their experience, that they're not alone in what they're going through, affirm their courage and tenacity, that they have strength inside of them that's kept them going and will continue to keep them going. And also encouraging them to see their physician, especially if they told you that they're having some new physiological symptoms. So I see something just question dropped in the chat here. Someone's asking, can you talk about the link between rumination and paralysis of the inability to make decisions? Yeah, so anxiety and depression, one of an interesting and nasty kind of features of that is that paralysis in decision making. It's almost like you've not had trouble making decisions before, but you're caught between two options and you're just kind of stuck. Um, Generally speaking, I would say the connection between rumination and that paralysis is people who ruminate are always going through the what ifs to the nth degree. So what if I do this, and then based on that, what if this happens, and based on that, what if this happens, what if this happens, and it goes on and on and on, almost to a completely illogical extent. At a certain point, there's no way to begin to predict the what ifs. Um, and so a person is just kind of left with, if I can't predict, then I can't control. And if I can't control, then I feel insecure and like I don't want to make a decision. So I think it goes back to this idea of empowerment and feeling like you've got control. And people who are worried and ruminating and feeling caught in that kind of worry trap with depression, I think there's a sense of not being in control and having anxiety about the unpredictability of the future. It's a really, really good question. Okay, I want to check in again. This is another one of these online polls. How have you seen depression and anxiety manifest in either producers or their family members? Go ahead and scan this QR code, go back to that, and I'd love to see what you have to say. And it looks like from Meg, yes, control is huge, and there's so much farmers don't have control over. You're absolutely right. We've seen that especially with weather, the economic conditions. It's a pretty wild where your livelihood is based on factors that you can't control. Yeah, how have you seen depression and anxiety manifest in other producers or their family members? A farmer who's angry all the time. Yeah, when things are rough, it can absolutely affect our mood and it can leak out in unfriendly ways. I see anger again here. Substance abuse. Substance abuse, absolutely. People often want to just kind of numb out. When things don't feel good, they would rather not feel. And so, alcohol, opiates, those kinds of things can really take their toll on people. Unkempt personal appearance, that's right. You just kind of let yourself go, not bathing, not brushing your teeth. Isolation, again, withdrawing from things you used to anymore. Farmers who won't come to the coffee shop anymore, absolutely. My grandpa farmed just a little bit. He was not a big farmer, but he farmed just a tiny bit. And he and a bunch of men would meet like at the local gas station and have coffee at 5 in the morning, or the McDonald's and have coffee at 5 in the morning. And when people don't show up to those regularly scheduled appointment times, which are very important for people's mental health, it's an indicator that something's not quite right. Absolutely. A well-kept property becomes messy or unkempt. You just kind of let things go. You don't maintain your equipment. Pain, stop participating in church, fighting among the family members. Absolutely. Abrupt big decision. Yes, that's a huge one. That is a huge thing. Sometimes people just feel at the end of their rope, and so they get impulsive. And that impulsivity sometimes is a clue that, oh, maybe something there's not quite right. Decline in the level of care for their livestock. Livestock become like family members. Like your cows, so you know the things, the people in your herd, and so when you stop taking care of them, that can indicate a problem. Yeah, discord amongst family members, not talking to each other, always complaining about the wife. Sure. Yeah, reading this again, it's like I feel this kind of sense of heaviness. And I feel this sense of heaviness because those of you who are contributing to this, it's like these are not abstract principles to you. You have seen this, you've lived this, you know this, you may be experiencing this yourself. And I really, really appreciate you sharing so honestly about what our farmers and farm families are feeling in these moments. That's big. Can't get off the couch. Really can't get off the couch. Absolutely. Um, sometimes the depression can make someone lose all of their energy. When people say they can't get out of bed, it's not a defect in their character. It is an effect of really deep emotions having playing out in their physical body. Desperation for money, absolutely. Down talking their self or their farm, yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing this, everyone. I really appreciate that. That's huge. So we've talked about some heavy stuff so far. In fact, all the stuff that you guys just put in that poll, that's heavy. That's very heavy things. And we're about to get into even heavier stuff. Before jumping in, I want to take a moment just to acknowledge how difficult these topics can be. Again, these are not just academic ideas without emotion tied to them. Each of these things, depression, anxiety, suicide, They are real and they affect real, living, breathing people. I'm sure that if I opened the floor right now, each of us could talk about the influence that these things have exerted on our own lives or in the lives of the people we love. So I want to encourage you, take heart. These are hard things to talk about, but by doing so, you just might become the instrument for someone's healing. Maybe it's a stranger, maybe it's someone you work with, maybe it's someone in your family. I'm going to display several signs indicating someone might be considering suicide. This is not an exhaustive list. And just because someone might exhibit one or more of these signs, it doesn't necessarily mean they're suicidal. It does, however, mean we should take note and be prepared to, at the very least, check in on them and ask how they're doing. Okay. So it's a myth that people who talk about suicide aren't likely to commit suicide. Talking about suicide is a serious thing, and that should be taken very seriously, even if it's couched in a joke. Sometimes people will laugh it off, but it's still something we take seriously. If someone's talking about suicide, even if they joke around about it, you follow up with that person. And this sounds bold, and we're going to get into this and more explicit instruction here in a second, but ask them if they're serious about it. Point blank, straight up, ask them. Isolation or withdrawing from others is another warning sign. Being around others is often hard when you're hurting. Isolation, as you probably know, rarely makes anything better. It often only exacerbates the problem when the only thing you're hearing are your own thoughts. Sometimes that's not the best thing. Isolation can also indicate that a person is trying to cut ties with the world around them. People considering suicide often feel trapped or hopeless. They might feel like death is their only chance to experience any kind of relief. They might start to self-medicate with drugs and alcohol. Some of you mentioned that and how stress shows up in the people you know. They might start to give their stuff away. They might start to say goodbye to people. And this one seems counterintuitive, but people with a history of depression or anxiety with a sudden positive change in mood might be considering suicide. And again, that sounds totally counterintuitive. You might think, oh, they're getting better. That's a good thing. The change in mood could be from the perceived relief they think they're going to feel from not being alive anymore. Sometimes people who make that decision, they just kind of get a little bounce because they feel like, the end of my suffering is in sight. And certainly, if someone experiencing difficulties starts accumulating things that could kill them, you might check in, especially if you know they have a history of depression or anxiety. And this is a tough one, especially for people in the farming community, because people in the farming community are around lots of things that could kill them. And I talked to a farmer out in the Plain States about a year or two ago, and he told me about a farming, and he would put air quotes over this, a farming accident that he and many in his community felt like was maybe actually a suicide. So very real, very scary, very serious things. So all of this begs an important question. If you suspect that someone might be considering suicide, what on earth do you do? Well, you can engage in some very basic triage. The tools I'm about to share with you are time tested and they're relatively straightforward. They are going to be super uncomfortable. I'm just going to tell you that right up front. They're very uncomfortable, they're very bold, but they are good for assessing the situation. They're good for intervening in the situation, and they're good to hold over until you can refer that person on for more help. So again, I want to issue this disclaimer here. These tools are not treatment. They're not long-term fixes. They're just meant to be in the moment help, kind of like CPR. Like in CPR, you do that until someone can come and take over and really start helping. The things I'm about to describe to you are things you can do in the moment until we can get someone more help. So always refer someone considering suicide to a professional who can give more intensive help. And I recognize that in some rural areas, that's not an easy proposition. I would even now start to think about who are physicians that are somewhat close by that could be numbers you could call, local mental health agencies that you could call. And we'll be talking about and thinking about that here in a second. So what do you do? What do you do? First, if we suspect that someone is considering suicide, we straight up ask them as straightforwardly as we possibly can, are you considering suicide? That's a bold question, and that's an uncomfortable question, but it's the right question. If they answer yes, then it's an indication to take them very seriously, and then you proceed on to the next question. I generally always ask these questions, whether they give me a no or a yes, but if they give a yes, that's very significant. You absolutely ask the next question. The next question is, okay, you've said yes, you're thinking about suicide. Do you have a plan for how you're going to kill yourself? Again, that is a very bold question, and those words can feel scary coming out of your mouth. Like, oh, if I ask this question, am I just putting the idea in their head? Absolutely not. You ask the question, do you have a plan for how to kill yourself? If they answer no, it might indicate that they're not in immediate danger. But you should still seek some deeper help for them, refer them on for deeper help. If they answer yes to that question, and like I said, even if they answer no, I still proceed to the next question. But if they answer yes to that question, you should proceed to the next question. And the next question is, okay, you said you're thinking about suicide. You said you got a plan. Do you have the means by which to carry out your suicide plan? So if someone says, I'm going to hang myself, do you have the rope? Do you have the rafters? If someone says, I'm going to overdose on pills, okay, do you have the pills? Where are they? What pills are you going to use? Again, this is bold stuff, but it's important. If they answer no, again, maybe it's an indication that perhaps they aren't in immediate danger. But if they answer yes, that's another yes, which means the seriousness is building. You should absolutely ask the next question. Each successive yes is an indication that the threat is more and more severe. Again, even if they answer no, I would still go to the next question. If they answered yes to the previous questions, it means they're thinking about suicide. It means they have a plan. It means they've got the equipment or whatever necessary to fulfill their plan. You ask them, okay, so when do you plan to do it? When do you plan to kill yourself? If they can't really give you a straight answer there, it's still serious, and you should stay with them and talk to them and refer them on to someone who can give them greater and deeper help. Use your intellect and your gut. Again, we talked about trusting your gut. In combination, these two things should help you gauge what's in front of you. But if they say yes, it is very serious. It means they have the intent, they have the plan, they have the means, they've got the timeline by which to die, and they're at high risk. You should not let them out of your sight or let them off the phone if you're on the phone with them. It's very, very serious. So at this point, you might be thinking, oh God, okay, so what if I do with someone who is actively suicidal? I think there are a few things you can do. First and foremost, I think you should be honest about your intentions. Tell them you're worried about them and that you plan to call others to help them. That's big. Do not give them a false sense of confidentiality when it comes to suicidal ideation. You do not need to get their permission to involve other people, period. I will say this is a little bit of a pro tip. Though you don't need their permission to involve other people, it's often helpful to ask them for their permission as a form of buy-in. So what does that mean? So I had someone in my office over the summer who answered yes to a lot of these questions. And it was clear that they did not need to be alone. And so I said, hey, is it okay if we get on your cell phone on speaker and call your spouse and see if your spouse can come in and be part of this conversation with us? And they said, yeah, that's fine. Now, I did not need their permission to involve their spouse or anyone else in that conversation. But by asking them for permission, it got some buy-in. It feels like it's giving them a little bit of power over their destiny in that moment. And that kind of low threshold permission granting typically works. It helps build an alliance between you and the person you're working with. Again, you do not need that permission, but it's a good kind of relationship building, therapeutic alliance building practice. And it works 9 times out of 10, I would say. If they say no, you call anyhow and you say, well, sorry, I got to do that. Always refer or engage people who can provide more help than you can. Have the numbers of the local mental health agencies on handy. Most of those places have crisis response units that can come out. Again, in rural areas, this is sometimes spread out far and few between. I would maybe even proactively work with physicians that might be in your area and say, hey, do we have a plan? If this is what comes up, what kind of resources are you able to provide? It may even be true that you work with local law enforcement too, about plans or training they may have that might be able to help. We'll talk a little bit about local law enforcement again here in a second. I think you should call the suicide hotline. It's right here. It's now a 3-digit number. You can call it or text it. It's 988. This number offers help for people who are thinking about dying by suicide and for people helping a person who is suicidal. So let's say that you're in a situation with someone and everything we've talked about today, your mind goes blank and you're like, I don't know what the heck I'm supposed to do. You call 988 and say, hey, I've got someone with me who's talking about suicide. I don't know what to do. And they should be able to walk you through that. Okay. It's a really important, powerful tool. If the person isn't physically present with you, or maybe they were in your office and then they storm out, I think it's okay to contact local law enforcement. If it's an immediate active threat, call 911 or have someone else call 911 if you're on the phone with someone. Depending on the situation, you could also call the non-emergency line, have officers do a well check. Again, this is where the first point comes into play. It's very, very, very important to be honest with the person you're speaking with. If you plan to call law enforcement, tell them. Tell them. Sometimes when the police show up unexpectedly, it can escalate a situation or make someone feel more defensive, which is why it's really important to be honest with people about what your intentions are. And honestly, you may have people who are in the throes of considering suicide that you engage these right practices and they might get pissed at you. And that is okay. It is okay. It is okay for them to be mad at you as long as they're alive. Okay, we have just talked through a whole heck of a lot of very, very heavy information. So I want to take a pause for a minute, let some of that digest, and I want to throw it out there if you would like to come off mute and say something, or if you'd like to drop something in the chat. I just want to take a moment to let this sit and respond to anything you may want to respond to, and then we will segue to Karen again, who will talk about resources that the Farm Family Resource Initiative has in place that are extraordinarily beneficial for all of the things that we've talked about. So I'm going to shut up. Any comments, thoughts, reactions, questions? Okay, so I see a comment, Cody. It's good to have you on here, Cody. I saw your name on the registration link. I'm glad you're able to be here. Cody writes, so I worked as a paramedic prior to starting medical school, and if I ever had a patient that was a farmer, it was an immediate red flag for me. There's a notion in the medical field that farmers do not seek medical care for themselves unless it's very, very bad. Do you think this is related back to not feeling like they can show weakness or anxiety about possibly being too sick or take care of the farm? Cody, that is a brilliant question. I have a couple of gut reactions to that. I do think that it probably goes back to a sense of weakness, especially in traditionally aged men who have a certain set of core values about what it means to be a man. My dad, for example, is not a farmer, but he will not go to the doctor at all. And I think that's rooted in the sense of, as a man, I do not want to admit my own weakness or my own mortality, or I don't want to be the center of attention because it's my job to protect other people, not other people's job to protect me. So I think that's a heavy component to it. I also think that the financial piece of that is significant. You know, it's not always, if you're struggling with finances already as a producer, the last thing you want to do is go and put your family in a more of a financial burden, and going to get medical care can be very expensive. So I think also there's just a lot of like, oh, I really don't need this preventative care service. And preventative care services are extraordinarily important. So I think there's a constellation of factors, and I think you're right on the money, Cody, for noting that. There's another comment in the chat here. How do you address the long waits to see a mental health professional, or only telehealth as an option, and the patient is not interested in over the phone or video? That's a really, really great question, and it's something that's becoming even more problematic. Um, so I think I think that one thing that might be helpful is the support that can come through people in your community. So, as much as people try to disengage when they're feeling stressed or depressed or anxious, sometimes the best sources of support are your buddies at the coffee shop, or a family member, or this is another thing, someone affiliated with the church or whatever religious organization you're a part of. Those kinds of non professional or lay kinds of help can actually be really, really powerful. And so I think there's definitely a place to plug into that while you're waiting for mental health services to open up. Um, Karen's going to talk a little bit about some groups that are offered through Farm Family Resource Initiative. There is a hotline. I know that's still a phone intervention, but those kinds of things can be good band-aids to hold over until mental health services are available. It's a brilliant question. Meg is joining here. She says, I agree about reluctance to seek medical care on the part of many, but some people have generations long relationships with a general physician, like they do with clergy, and getting them to doc maybe doorway to mental health counseling. Absolutely, absolutely. If there is a if there is a long established relationship with a practitioner, a family doc or something like that, um, they can be really powerful tools to facilitate entrance into mental health services. I go back to, this was several years ago. I was at a community college. A colleague of mine was giving a presentation about psychological distress and all of this. And there was an older gentleman who I think was working security, and he was in the crowd. And he was talking about, we were talking about depression. And he said, well, I've never been depressed in my life. But he says, but I went to the doctor and told him I was bummed out, and he gave me some medicine for it, and I feel a lot better. And that captured so beautifully, I think, even the language that we use for this, and the power of a physician to engage people to talk about and think about their mental health in a way that's safe. Like, to say you're depressed was not safe for this person, but to say, hey, I'm bummed out, and then for the physician to notice that and then help and intervene, huge. So, Meg, I think you're right on the money. Having a generations long relationship with a primary care physician can go a long way. These are such great comments. I'm so thankful for you dropping in here. I'm mindful of our time, so I do want to get to Karen. If you have other thoughts, go ahead and drop those in the chat. I'll be watching. But Karen, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the resources through Farm Family Resource Initiative.
All right, I'm back. So let's go through some slides real quickly because I want to make sure we've got a few minutes left just for last minute questions. So our Farm Family Resource Initiative, many of you have heard of it. We receive funding through the state of Illinois and through the Illinois Department of Agriculture through the USDA. Dr. Ushinsky, we'll move through pretty quickly through these. I'd encourage you to check out our website. We have lots of resources on it. We have a resource tab. We do a blog every month. We do a podcast every month. We have lots of recorded webinars, lots of information on that website. We do have a helpline, so you can call or text this helpline. You can email the helpline. It's 24/7. It's anonymous. A person calls the helpline, they're talking to a mental health professional. This is the call center in Springfield with Memorial Behavioral Health that also answers the calls for 988. This is just a designated line that comes in. When it rings, they know it's ag related. We offer up to 6 telehealth counseling sessions with a School of Medicine counselor. It can be individual, group, or couple telehealth counseling, and there's no cost to receive those sessions. So if you call into the helpline, you're always offered some additional counseling, and that's what this telehealth counseling is. We offer a nurse scholar program. All nurses have to have continuing nurse education. 20 hours of this is on demand. It's all on the computer. We co-sponsor this with AgriSafe and with Farm Credit. So it ends up costing a nurse nothing. And we've had nurses, nurse practitioners go through this. It's really addressing health and safety issues that are unique to ag workers. So we've got 2 groups that will be starting in January. We did a suicide bereavement support group, and we've decided to expand that. So starting in January, we'll have the suicide bereavement support group that will meet monthly, and also just a general grief support group meeting monthly. So watch for that. We'll be advertising that. They'll be virtual. There'll be no cost. So please watch for that and help us spread the word about those support groups. Check out what the U of I Extension is doing along with the North Central Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Center. If you check out farmstress.org, that's their website, and they have lots of resources, and those are resources within these Midwest states that basically categorize them within whatever state you're living in. My contact information, and then I'll open it back up for questions, either questions for myself or for Dr. Wyszynski. Anybody have any thoughts or any questions, anything we can provide you with? This webinar will be posted. Many of the professional development webinars that we've done are posted on our website. We have Dr. Wyszynski talked about hitting those hard topics. We have a whole series on our website talking about things like dealing with grief. Am I drinking too much? How to deal with divorce within the farm family. So a lot of those topics that we hit on today, if you take a look at our website, those are covered in one in a series that we did here a few months ago. So looking for resources, make sure and check out that website.
Meg requested an unmute.
Great.
I think I'm unmuted. I wonder if Karen, you and Dr. Wyszynski might talk about farm youth and stress. I live up in Minnesota and work in farm stress with our Minnesota Department of Agriculture, and we encounter a lot of youth and actually a lot of adults who think back to when they were youth and talk about how challenging it was to be a farm kid. I mean, there were many wonderful things about it, but also stressors, and they were in a very unique position compared to their town peers. And so I would just wonder if you talk a little bit about that phenomenon and maybe resources that are available for people to work with youth.
Yeah, that's a great question, Meg. Karen, do you want to take a stab at that first?
I will let you answer that question because I could so relate. I am a product of youth stress, being raised on the farm and then continuing to farm. So I'll just let you answer that, Dr. Wyszynski, from a professional point of view.
Yeah. Well, I have to admit, Meg, I don't know as much about the experiences of youth in farm families and the unique needs that they face. I would say that they're just kind of the first thoughts that come to mind, some of the difficulties are feeling either out of place with town contemporaries, like there are obligations and expectations that they have to deal with that those around them don't. Time commitments, family obligations, probably a different kind of value of work, maybe even that puts them out of step. And one of the things that has been talked about a little bit today is succession planning. Who's going to take over the next generation? I would say it's probably not unlikely to think that some of our farm family youth are stressed about, do I have to take the farm over? Can I take the farm over? Do I want to take the farm over? Like there's, in some sense, has my destiny already been prepared and planned for me, or do I get to control my destiny? And if so, how? And so I would suspect that probably good resources for students in these situations. Most schools now have dedicated school counseling staff. Those are generally a little bit less stigmatizing because they're not therapists in the traditional sense of what you would think about therapists, but they're equipped with the same skills that therapists have. And so school counselors are probably a good resource for those students thinking about the future, connecting with people who are similar to them. But that's a really good question. I need to think on that a little bit more.
I'll also add in that we have done several presentations this fall with school counselors and to let them know about FFRI resources. So farm kids can certainly access. You don't have to be any certain age to call the helpline. And I also want to mention that we're just, if any of you were at the Farm Progress Show, you saw Governor Pritzker announce a program that we're working with the Illinois FFA Foundation, and that's just getting off the ground, where young people in our FFA chapters will be offered mini grants where they can do mental health education awareness in their communities. And that's a program that we modeled after the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. They've had success with that. So another way to address youth stress is to get those youth members involved. And of course, FFA is a natural fit for that.
It looks like we have a question in the chat, Karen. Does SAU Center for Rural Health and Social Service Development collaborate with the Illinois Farm Bureau and their members, which most farmers in Menard and Sangamon County and other central Illinois farmers are very involved?
Yes, Teresa, thank you for that. Absolutely. So we have an advisory council that meets every month, and that advisory council is made up of people that you would expect. Illinois Farm Bureau, U of I Extension, Farm Credit, and others. So we work very closely with Farm Bureau. We'll be at their annual meeting. We do a lot of partnering with Farm Bureau. So thank you for mentioning that. Our time says 1 o'clock, so we might take one or two questions yet. Yeah, Teresa, you're a member of Farm Bureau, so that's great. If any of you have other ideas for outreach or other partners that you want to share with us, don't hesitate to reach out to me. There's a contact us button on our website. If you have other ideas about partnerships, make sure and let us know. One last comment or question?
Thank you, Meg, and Teresa for those kind comments. Appreciate that.
Yes, thank you so much. All right, well, let me remind you of the evaluation. I want to thank Dr. Wyszynski so much for his expertise and for sharing with us today. Please complete the evaluation. The conversation doesn't have to end here. You've got my contact information right there. Check out the website. Thank you all for participating.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
The agricultural industry faces unique pressures. If you're feeling overwhelmed or hopeless, there is help. Call 1-833-FARM-SOS to reach the Farm Family Resource Initiative's confidential helpline.